Hey folks, welcome to week 9 of DMD100, Intro to Digital Media Design. Alright, so we're on the back half of the semester here in week 9. Let's take a look at the week 9 module and we'll look at the week 9 overview. Okay, so a few things going on this week. Number one, we have a week-long media analysis. This is our second media analysis that we're going to do. The subject matter this time revolves around art or fine art traditionally. So we're going to take a look at that in a minute. So you guys will be working just like we did with the previous media analysis where we started with television. You're either going to work individually or you can work in groups to answer a set of questions regarding the certain pieces of art that you can choose from. So we'll get into that in a second. We do have one consumable this week as we are starting to work on our actual title sequence. Now that you've done all your preparation work for the title sequence, now we're going to start building it. So this is our one last chance to take a look at some examples of professional title sequences that have been done. So this link here takes you to this YouTube channel where there are a variety of title sequences from a whole bunch of different movies. Some better than others, of course, but it does give you a really nice selection to look at. Now, the main reason I want to show you this is, so previously we've looked at some title sequences that are sort of renowned for being particularly good. Here, I'm just showing you a large selection of them because I want you to see different ways in which title sequences have been done over the years, so you can make some choices for yours. Not that you're necessarily going to copy some of these, but it can give you some inspiration, the way they handle the typography, the color choices they use, the way they incorporate video clips or imagery or whatever. So you're going to have a bunch of options, and this is sort of like your last bit of research to do as you're diving into the building of your actual title sequence. So take advantage of this, look for some opportunities to pick up some ideas from these various options, and there's a whole ton of them in here. This YouTube channel collects a whole ton of title sequences, so check them out, see what you like, maybe you'll get some ideas. Okay, and then like I mentioned, we are continuing to work on our semester-long project, creating your title sequence. So nothing is due this week. You'll see that here under due, we have nothing. But you are continuing to work on your own through the week on the first draft of Step 4. Now, just to take a look at that, Step 4, of course, is the actual building of your title sequence from our semester project. Now, we introduced this last week, so you should already be working on it. But just to reiterate, of course, right now it's time to actually build your title sequence. You've collected all of your inspirational bits, your photography, your video clips, any audio you're going to use. Hopefully you've started to plan the title sequence, sort of figured out what you want it to look like, and so on and so forth. So just to review the specifications, your title sequence must have a minimum of 10 slides or states. Basically what that means is that the content of the screen has to change a minimum of 10 times. Whether that's the background image, the video clip, the typography, whatever. Now if you're building it in something like, say, Microsoft PowerPoint, it's really easy to sort of figure out 10 slides because something like PowerPoint or Apple Keynote or Google Slides, works with the concept of a slide presentation, and so therefore 10 of those get you your minimum. But if you're using something a little more advanced like Adobe Premiere or even iMovie or After Effects, well then it doesn't really work on slides, so you're really looking for sort of 10 transitions. So try to think of it that way. You have to include the name of the movie or the television show and the names of all of the lead actors. Remember, not the characters in the movie, but the actors who are playing the characters, starring so-and-so. You can also include any other individuals or organizations that you'd like the name of the director, a producer's name, whatever you would like. Okay, those are optional, but you can certainly include those too. And as we've been saying all along, you can include photography, graphics, illustration, iconography, video clips, music, and or sound effects, whatever you want. So our last step, step 3, was to really sort of curate the content that we had collected. So hopefully by now you have a collection of photography or video clips or whatever that all look like they go together. They make sense together. You're creating a visual theme that sort of makes sense based on the type of movie or TV show that you are making this for. So, again, if you're working in the horror genre, then make sure your choices make sense for that. If you're working in a romantic comedy genre, then make sure your choices make sense for that. So, stay on theme. Primarily, of course, your title sequence needs to tell a story that is in keeping with and enhances your chosen movie or TV show, the genre and the theme. You can choose any visual style that you feel is appropriate. This could come from visual art, like we looked at artistic interpretation, or you can be getting inspiration from any of the number of different historic title sequences that we've been looking at. Good typography and layout is expected. Now, even if you don't have any experience with typography and layout, just keep it clean, easy to read, simple, stay within the frame that you're working with. Don't let things bleed off the edge. You know, good basic craft. Okay. Now, we talked about the tools, but I'm going to go over it one more time. So we basically have different levels. You can use any type of digital tool you want to create this title sequence, and my suggestions are as follows. If you feel as though you're going to work at the beginner level, you can use something like Microsoft PowerPoint, Apple Keynote, or Google Slides. You can use the built-in animation and transition tools that are in those pieces of software to help you sort of make your title sequence look a little more professional. But by now, of course, you should probably know how to use PowerPoint or Keynote or Google Slides, or maybe all three of them. And so you can pick whichever one you want. That's a good entry-level way to make this title sequence. Remember, this is a project. We're not trying to make a professional title sequence here. But the tools that are available in those basic presentations tools will certainly help get the job done. Now, at the intermediate level, you could use something like Apple's iMovie, or you could use other sort of free-to-use introductory video editing software that you can find. So that's a good choice too. Maybe you already know iMovie, so it's easy to use. And if you've got some experience in other more professional software, you can move up to the advanced level and maybe use Adobe Premiere or Apple Final Cut Pro if you have some experience with that. Now is probably not the time to teach yourself that software, but if you already know it and you want to use it to make this title sequence, then you're certainly welcome to. And then, of course, my super advanced level, which I call the you should be teaching this class level, is if you want to build it in Adobe After Effects. If you have experience with that software, that's fine too. But remember, everybody is welcome to just break out Microsoft PowerPoint and do it that way. I'm more concerned with the visual choices that you make, the way you handle typography, the color palette you use. That's way more important than how fancy the software is that you use. I want you to create a good, appropriate title sequence for all the choices that you've made up to this point. Okay? Makes sense? Okay, so you should be working on that now. We're going to turn in, next week, we're going to turn in a rough draft, and you'll get some feedback on that. So right now you're working on the draft. So this is not the finished version, but, you know, get as much done as you can, and you're going to turn it in for some feedback so that we can let you know how it's going, if you're on the right track, etc., etc. Okay, so that is what you're going to be working on for general homework. And again, like I said, all week you are working either alone or in some small groups on your second media analysis. Let's take a look at the media analysis, and then we'll go through each of the pieces of artwork you can pick from, okay? So just like our media analysis on television, you are going to choose one of the works below. In this case, it's a work of fine art, and look closely at it sort of once for enjoyment, and then a couple more times from a more critical eye. Take a really good look at it, take down notes, check it out alone, and if you and maybe a friend are picking the same piece of artwork, if you want to analyze it together, that's fine. I have no problem with people working together. Just remember that you're turning in individual submissions, okay? So make sure that your answers to the questions are your answers. So feel free to work on it together, but you're going to turn in your own analysis. Pay attention to all the details that are referenced in these questions below. So you're going to want to read through the questions first so you kind of know what you're looking for, okay? So the questions are broken down into a few categories. First impressions, there are 3 questions here you need to answer. Inferences, there's 4 questions here. Concepts, which an additional 3 questions. Craft, 3 questions for that. Circumstance, 3 questions. And response, which is 2 questions. You'll notice the categories are different than the media analysis we did for television. You would expect they would be because we view and critique fine art differently than we view and critique television. They're all forms of art, but of course the language we use to talk about them is a little different, naturally. Some of the things are similar. You might find some similarities in the questions, but for the most part there's a different criteria upon which we do our critique. Once you've done the critique and you've answered the questions, you can simply turn it in as a Microsoft Word document to get full credit. No problem with that. But if you want to get some extra credit, then build it into a visual presentation, including some imagery. And you can do that in PowerPoint, Google Slides, or Keynote, and you can earn some extra credit that way. Make sure that whichever version you turn in, whether it's the Word document or a presentation, that you include the name of the piece of artwork, the year it was created, who the artist was, etc., etc. Now, your choices of fine art are as follows. We have the Winged Victory, which was done around 190 BCE by unknown. We don't know who the artist is. Then we have the Storm on the Sea of Galilee, which is a painting by Rembrandt van Rijn, done in 1633. The Music Lesson, which was a painting done somewhere between 1662 and 1665 by Johannes Vermeer, who was a Flemish painter. The Spanish Dance, done in 1879, done by John Singer Sargent. A Bar at Folies Bergère, which was a painting done in 1882 by Edouard Manet. A Don Quixote was an ink drawing done by Pablo Picasso in 1955. Artistic Space number 44, which is a photograph that was taken in 1960 by photographer Cindy Sherman. Drowning Girl is a piece of graphic art illustration done in 1963 by Roy Lichtenstein. And then Afrocentric Power and Inequality is a collage done in 2007 by Shepard Fairey. So like our television shows we looked at, these of course start with really old representations of art and move forward to more modern representations. I want you to check out all of these, pick whichever one that you are most interested in to do the analysis on. Now in a second we're going to go through each of these pieces of artwork and talk about them in a little bit more detail, but just so you know, those are your choices. All right, so that's it for the week. You're going to do the media analysis, do a little more consuming of some title sequences just to sort of settle on the style you're going to use for yours, and keep working on the draft for your title sequence. If you need any help, if you get stuck, if you have any questions, be sure to check in with me during office hours or see me in class, and we'll go from there. All right, so it's time to go look at the pieces of artwork that you can choose from, and then you can go work on your media analysis. Now, the different media choices are as follows. Let's click through these. We'll see what we've got. I'm going to open each of these up separately. So this is your first one here. This is sometimes referred to as the Winged Victory. It is a very tall marble statue at the Louvre in Paris. I have seen it in person. It's enormous. It's strangely they had it placed on a landing on a giant stairwell. And it's funny because, of course, it's one of those classic statues that we only know it one way because that's how we have seen it. But naturally, the original had arms and a head. So we're so used to seeing it like this. And, of course, if we zoom in on it, you can see that, you know, lots of beautiful detail in the marble. So that is the first choice. Now, it's referred to as the Winged Victory as sort of shorthand, but the full title is The Winged Victory of Samothrace, which I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. So that was constructed roughly in 190 BCE, okay, and the artist is completely unknown. Okay, the next one you could choose from is this here. This is the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Let's take a look at this. And so the Storm on the Sea of Galilee is by Rembrandt, his full name Rembrandt van Rijn, from 1633. Now, at first glance, this just seems like a sailboat in the middle of a storm in the ocean, right? But if you really look closely at it and kind of zoom in and pan around, you're going to find all sorts of interesting detail about what's going on here. You might even recognize a character or two from this painting. It's a really dynamic painting. It's really beautiful. It does depict an interesting scene, and it is really loaded with metaphor. So that's that option. And that, again, is from 1633. Just like our TV shows, as we go through the list, they get newer and newer, closer in time. Now, the next one is by Johannes Vermeer, a beautiful Dutch painter. And this was painted somewhere between 1662 and 1665. This is called The Music Lesson. And we can see that here. This is a really beautiful painting done on board. You can see all sort of the cracks in the paint coming through it, but lots of interesting detail. It's an interior shot, and at first it seems fairly innocuous in that we have the music teacher standing over here and next to the student, who is a female, and you can see her reflection in the mirror, and she is working on the piano or the harpsichord. I'm not exactly sure what instrument that is, but it's a beautifully decorative harpsichord. But if you zoom in, you can see all sorts of detail going on, but really pay attention to the look on his face, the look on her face. There's some interesting inscription going on the instrument itself, as well as a variety of other items like this giant cello sitting on the ground. So that's your other option. Then we have one of my favorite paintings, The Spanish Dance by John Singer Sargent, who's an American painter. This is from 1879. This hangs in the Elizabeth Stuart Gardner Museum in Boston, so you can actually go see this one in person. It is really huge. It's much bigger in person than you would think it is. It's probably a good like 12, 15 feet tall, but it's a great painting. I really love this one, but there's a lot going on. Again, like all of our choices here, there's more things happening in the artwork than you can probably take in at first glance. So again, seeing versus looking. Look at all the characters in the background watching this woman dance. What's going on with all of them? So again, zoom in and look around and really pay attention to all the details when you're trying to answer those questions. Okay, next we have another one of my favorite paintings. This is a bar at Folies-Bergère, which is an actual bar in France. This was painted by Edouard Manet in 1882. Manet, not to be confused with Monet. Monet is probably, arguably, of the two of them, the more famous Impressionist painter. Manet, however, is also a wonderful Impressionist painter. And you might be familiar with this one. This one's pretty popular. But very interesting detail going on here. Similar to the music lesson, there is a mirror in the background and some reflection activity going on. The sort of structure of the reflection is a little strange in terms of how we see the back of the barmaiden compared to the patron. Now, this says something about who the patron is based on the way this painting is constructed, so think about that. And because it's an impressionistic painting, of course, the brush strokes are very large and textural, so you can really get in there and look at the detail quite a bit. Okay, so that's the other option. Then we have this famous sketch, I'll call it, from 1955 by Pablo Picasso. This is of Don Quixote, and you're probably familiar with the story of Don Quixote. This is done in sort of ink, and it's Don Quixote with his assistant, who's riding with him. Don Quixote is on a horse. His assistant is on a donkey. And maybe you're familiar with the story of The Man of La Mancha, which is a famous musical, or you've read the story of Don Quixote. But anyway, it's a beautiful story. But this is a sketch of the two of the main characters by Pablo Picasso, done in a style that Picasso is not really known for. One thing about Picasso is that he could employ a variety of artistic styles in his work. He's most known for his deconstructed abstract work, but of course he drew very realistically, he could paint realistically, he could sketch, he could draw. The guy was versatile. And so this is an example of a style of art that maybe you're not used to seeing with the name Pablo Picasso attached to it. Okay, the next one is called Artistic Space Number 44 by a photographer, Cindy Sherman. This is from 1960. Cindy Sherman is a really interesting photographer in that she not only tells sort of interesting narrative stories with her photography, but the majority of the time she is the subject of the photograph. So these are staged photographs where she is sort of setting up a scene, she's setting up characters, she's setting up props. The camera is on a tripod. She uses sequencing and timers to take the photographs, and she herself is the subject in a lot of her photographs. So these are almost self-portraits, but she's not playing herself. She's playing characters in these. And so this is her. This is the photographer as the character in the story. There's a lot of storytelling going on in this photograph. What happened with the bag of groceries? Why does she have that look on her face? What do her clothes have to do with the story going on? So a lot to sort of untangle here in this photograph. Okay, next we have a graphic from Roy Lichtenstein from 1963 called Drowning Girl. Now, Roy Lichtenstein is a famous pop artist. Like Andy Warhol, they functioned mostly around the 1960s. Pop artists took the visual vocabulary of very common commercial art forms and turned them into fine art. I'm way oversimplifying what pop art is, but you get the idea. And so as you can probably tell by looking at this piece, that Roy Lichtenstein took the visual vocabulary of comic books and used it for his fine art. And when I say visual vocabulary, I'm talking about things like the thought balloon, the black line style in which the characters are drawn, and the use of duotone, which is this sort of dot pattern, which is used for coloring purposes as well as sort of ink washes and whatnot for some of the other coloring. So Roy Lichtenstein really leveraged that sort of comic book visual for his fine art. The point of pop art was that you would use a style that people were familiar with for perhaps non-artistic output and then make it more easily accessible that way. Andy Warhol used silk screening, and he would use common elements like, of course, his famous Campbell's soup can, but of course he's known for much more than that. But you get the idea. So this is Roy Lichtenstein's piece. And then last but not least, we have a slightly more modern artist from 2007, Shepard Fairey. He is a collage artist, and this is called Afrocentric Power and Equality. Now, as a collage artist, of course, collages, as you know, are pieces of art that are made up of other pieces of things, whether it be other art or other things in general. And so Shepard Fairey does everything from using pieces of wallpaper to silk screening to literally ripping up pieces of paper and gluing them together. And so this is his piece, Afrocentric Power and Equality. And you can see that like the texture that is used in the graphic for this woman's hair is actually wallpaper. It is actually sort of textured wallpaper. And then you can see pieces of newspaper in the background as well as silk screening and a whole bunch of other techniques sort of merged together. Now, Shepard Fairey is an interesting artist in that he's a real sort of almost, and I'm going to use the term graffiti, but not in the way you might imagine it, but sort of almost a street-level artist using graffiti techniques and collage techniques in a way that really kind of is very evocative and done sort of with a lot of energy behind it. But at the same time, because he's a collage artist, he pulls things from other places, some of which he's gotten into a little bit of trouble with because he's been accused of copyright infringement because some of the things he puts into his work belong to other people. That being said, he still is a really interesting artist who does some amazing stuff, and his work is definitely worth zooming in on because there are all sorts of hidden textures and whatnot, which I will say none of them are there by accident. Okay, so the media analysis for the week is to choose one of those pieces of art, whichever one you find most interesting, to do a little bit of background research on each one and spend a lot of time basically staring at it and really trying to document as many of the details as possible. Once you